Welcome to Season 5 of the Founders Only podcast, where we uncover the pivotal trials and triumphs and the stories of great founders, delivering actionable advice on how to be the leader of the pack. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Founders Only. I am so excited today to welcome Victor Perolnik.
Thanks, Mia. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Victor is based in Berlin, Germany, and he is a seasoned entrepreneur and founder of Trustshoring, providing product advisory to startups and serving as the official software development partner of SaaS Academy. With a background in computer science and engineering management, Victor advises startups on lean product development and tech talent acquisition, while also serving as an occasional deputy CTO or CPO and angel investor in early stage ventures. Thanks again for joining me today.
Absolutely. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah. So let's start with, can you tell me a little bit about your journey to becoming the founder of Trustshoring?
Absolutely. So the professional journey of how I started Trustshoring really goes back into the 2010s. I was just in college there, really studying computer science, engineering management, those kinds of things. And I was in a random conference about a particular technology that I was a fan of. I was the classic software developer back then. And so I was hanging out at that conference and I noticed a booth. That conference was sponsored by a Ukrainian software house. And they were also very typical software developers, standing at the booth, trying to sell their services essentially to clients. And with my background, which we can go into, I thought, well, I can do that better. So I just went in there. I went into their booth. I said, look, let me try this, right? Let's work on this together. That's what I did literally on a conference. And it was great fun. They were just a little bit older than myself back then. They were great people. It just lacked a bit of the business experience. And so it was a great conference. And later we stayed in touch and decided to actually co-found a software house. That was a very random move for me. I've never thought about going into that direction to co-found a software house with 3 random Ukrainians, but I just did. And so that was my first business. That's not Trustshoring. That was the first business that I had, and that was really the learning business. I learned a lot about having partners, about selling, about marketing, about managing people, about absolutely everything. It had obviously its ups and downs and all of that you have to have running a company. But mostly what I learned is that I did not want to run a software house. I was working with great clients, mostly startups, mostly SaaS startups who wanted to launch or scale a business, right? And we had a lot of different people come to us, and obviously, what you see is that you can only position yourself as a company in a very narrow niche and be good at that. Also, as a software house, even though a lot of the software houses out there don't really realize that. And so we were only a very good fit for a sliver of clients, and it would be impossible to expand that. You probably shouldn't even do that. And so we had a lot of leads come in though, and I started just passing leads on to other software houses. That is what I started doing because I thought they were a better fit. You're a great client for us, but with what you're trying to do, you should go to somebody else. And that almost became a side hustle of mine. So I decided to stop and turn that into a business. I sold my shares, I exited the software house and started Trustshoring. Back in 2016, Trustshoring did only one thing. We were a matchmaker to software houses. So I literally turned that into a business. And it was great because back then it was, well, I call it a Wild East because most of the development was done in Eastern Europe. It was the Wild East when we started in about 2012, 2013 with the software house, and also 2016, that was the biggest demand. It was really to make sense of what's out there, find the best software house, and find one that's good and you could trust. And so that's what we did back then. And fast forward today, we're about 10 people, only working on that, and now on recruiting and consulting. That's what we've been doing for the past couple of years. To help our tagline is really help SaaS founders run productive development teams. And so whatever is necessary to do that, whether it's help with their process or help with give fractional CTOs, fractional CPOs, recruit great engineers and product people, or match them to a software house that's still there. And that is what we are today.
How did you come up with the name Trustshoring? I think I have an idea based on what you just explained, but I'm just curious because I think it's a great name.
Well, obviously, I was in the offshoring industry, right? That's what you call it, offshoring. You hire remotely, you outsource to offshore, right? And since the biggest problem was the lack of trust, it was just a bit of a play of words here. The name, though, is not really what we do today, right? We're less on outsourcing, more on building in-house teams and consulting. So I'll have to consider rebranding at some point, but that's how we got started, and that's hence the name.
So let's just unpack a little bit about the trust piece. So you said that was the biggest problem. Can you tell me more about that? How you identified that to be the biggest problem based on the offshoring piece? How did you uncover that the trust was the biggest issue?
Sure. Well, I would almost say that not just the trust, it was more the transparency, and trust is a part of that transparency aspect. Would have been a terrible name, but that it's more the transparency. And so what does that mean? Number one, to understand where to even hire, who to hire, where to find a good software house. We categorize software houses into different categories. And oftentimes the software house, a lot of these boutique software houses are just founded by an engineer. And that's not a bad, that's a good thing. Because they stay lean, they stay small, they do what they love doing. They're passionate about hiring good engineers, which is also great. But what they lack is a certain positioning, is a certain value proposition. Now that's getting better. They're getting more sophisticated. But back then it was literally, we're developers. Give us work. We'll work on that. Right. And so we were able to identify these clusters, different size, different specialization, different technology. Do you focus on the product definition as well? And do you know how to actually do that? Or do you just, you're trying to get a backlog and implement that? And so we were trying to really categorize companies into those and be able to guide a client through the selection process, and product literacy was fairly low back then as well. So clients really needed, they might not have known what a product manager or a quality assurance person was. And so they needed education on that as well. And so trust is another piece, because yes, back then it still happens that you get ripped off by a company. And so relying on a trusted network obviously helped. But yeah, overall, the biggest problem was transparency.
So let's talk about who Victor was before he became an entrepreneur. So where are you from?
I am from Germany. I grew up in a small town, very close to Munich, Germany, BMWs, beer, Oktoberfest, those kinds of things. And I, middle class, went to high school, moved to Berlin for my computer science degree. But the question, when did I become an entrepreneur, or any less sophisticated form of that, it goes really way back. I had my first client at 13. I somehow always wanted to basically sustain myself, and we were middle class, but we were never, let's say, rich. And I grew up in a fairly well-off neighborhood, and so I also wanted to have a Mac, let's say. But if not, I could have not just gotten one for Christmas. So I figured, let's try to earn some money, right? I just want to have a good computer, right? And so my parents really encouraged me with that. So that's really cool. They told me, you want more, here are ways to make money, right? Do that. And so my first ever gig was to create a website for the company my dad worked at. So you see, they massively helped me through this, right? They did bring my first client straight to my doorstep, but that was the first thing I did, and I created a presentation. I had no idea what I was doing. I sold a website, and then I had to learn how to actually make one. So that was how I got started. But that just followed on. I was a freelancer, developer, tried to learn different things, I dabbled in UI UX design and in absolutely everything involved in that. I tried co-founding ventures with people at university that went absolutely nowhere. The entire journey. I have never had an actual job, so I think that definitely defines me. I've never worked a 9 to 5 for sure.
So, how would you describe yourself as a kid beyond the obviously the drive to have some independence? Clearly, you had that. Tell me a little bit about who you were, what you like to do, how you spent your time, some other words to describe your personality back then.
I'm not sure if people would describe me a nerd back then. I don't think it was that bad, but I was certainly the more calm kid at school. Um, Hang out with friends, but not like overly dramatic. Not go to the big school events. Not hang out with the cool kids. That was definitely not my thing. Um, but other than that, nothing extraordinary. No like crazy hobbies, no big vision for life other than that. I've always just tried doing my thing. I've never tried to compare myself with others, never tried to, I've never done what I did to be cool or have more than somebody else or more than anybody in general. Just I just wanted to do my thing and be done with that. For example, when we were um, graduating, right? I'm not sure how that is in other countries, but you obviously have your final exams and you collect points throughout the last 2 years really of your studies in Germany, and so all of that goes into your final exam when you graduate, into your final evaluation. And I didn't try to do my best as most people would and see what comes out of it. I just set a goal, which was good enough for me to get into the degree that I wanted to get in. And then I just mapped out where I would have to get how many points to make that final mark throughout the entire 2 years. And then I just ranked that by where I found it easy or hard to achieve. And then I literally skipped the classes where I figured it's not worth going. So I literally got the worst marks. I handed in empty tests. I didn't care. But I put in the work where I thought this would be easy. And I actually finished with one of the best marks at the school. So that was me, just trying to do my thing, not to do too much, but also not too little. Get what I wanted, but nothing else, so to speak.
I have two questions. First question is, how did you pick building a website as your first venture? Like, were you already kind of practicing on the computer, just learning how to code just as a hobby? Or was there something that told you, if I want to buy a Mac, let me try to build a website? Even if your father wouldn't have given you that opportunity, I assume you would have probably tried to do that specific type of work for somebody else. So how did you come up with that?
Great question. Yeah, no, I've definitely been learning how to code. My dad was an electrical engineer, and so he inspired me to do that very early on. I definitely have that from him. He did not know how to code websites or the entire web technology stack, but he was great because I know he kept, he stayed up late to try to configure things on the computer so it worked for me when I ran into issues. He almost learned that himself just to help me. And yeah, so it was just that I was learning that more or less for fun. It was interesting for me. And then I figured I could probably apply that. But I wasn't any good or anything. I was just playing around with code, what you do at a very basic code academy right now. And so I wasn't actually good enough to build a sophisticated website when I sold it. But then I dove into CMS systems, and I figured I don't have to build that from scratch. I was like, that was 2008, 2007, something like that. So these were coming up, and eventually I delivered that website, and I think it was running for 5 to 10 years, something like that, for a significantly long time. Then they got bought up and obviously replaced, but it's a good run.
So, what does your mom do for a living?
She is an accountant, so good with numbers, and so she was obviously the one who said, if you want to, make more, there are ways. And so she was always good with finances and savings and investments and things like that. Not entrepreneurial per se, but just understanding of the numbers and how things work, versus my daddy, who was more the technical one, who taught me the technical skills, if you will. Yeah.
Wow. That's a pretty good combination to be able to build a somewhat successful business, to have a parent that's an engineer and a parent that's an accountant. That's pretty good. So maybe this is really in the cards for you.
In
Yeah,
hindsight,
yeah, yeah.
well, it's definitely not me. It's the inputs. So I'm grateful for everything, for
So you
everything.
said something that I thought was really interesting about how you were able to kind of, how would I re-describe what you said? But you were talking about how you made some decisions about what coursework you needed to do in order to achieve the goal that you had. And when you described that, it actually really it made me think of the process of matchmaking for um, a software house and a product, or another business that's building a product. So I'm just curious, did that way that your mind works, right, to break down a goal into steps like that and reverse engineer it to say, what are the key things that I need to do in order to achieve this goal? Did you ever think, or did you ever have an opportunity to apply that technique to trust shoring? I'm curious.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I would say so because, well, basically what that boils down to is to be able to, as you said, break something down into a process, into steps, and into repeatable tasks that lead to a goal. And I've always been a process and a playbook person. So I've always liked that, and that's what I'm fairly good at. Probably, maybe not great, but fairly good at, to break things down into steps and playbooks. And yeah, you mentioned in the intro that we're a partner at the Martell SaaS Academy, and what I really love about the SaaS Academy is how, obviously that comes from Dan first and foremost, but his love for playbooks, right, and for systems. And he always says, if you don't, operationalize it, you haven't done it, right? Most people come up with a great concept and with anything, but then they keep having to do it themselves, and they don't do the last step of operationalizing, meaning creating a playbook around that, or an SOP, or a process, or whatever you might call it, and handing it out to the team to do it themselves. Or even better, have the team create those, have great team members who can take that ownership, create those, but they have to be created. And so I think I've always done various forms of that. I always keep telling that story where I once had to onboard an assistant of mine, um, and I was just on vacation. I happened to be on vacation during her starting date. I have no idea how that happened, um, but I just sent her a link to our Notion. It was way back when I literally only had one assistant. That's all I had. Um, I sent her a link to the Notion process. I had one part-time position. Everything was laid out in Notion. And 2 weeks later, she had completely onboarded herself, and she was doing everything that she was supposed to do, without getting on one call with me. And I was very glad about that. Right now, it looks a bit different because we changed a lot in our processes over the past 2 years. And so we really need to create those again. And onboarding takes a bit more time. But yeah, I love SOPs. I love playbooks. And whenever I go see a SaaS Academy event or intensive, or I watch some of Dan's videos, I'm really inspired because I really like how he does that, and he's very smart about that.
Yeah, I think also your example, I'm thinking because, I have an adult child, and I know how unique it is to have a young person who is still grade school level to really approach something as strategically and operationally as you did. You literally reverse engineered something so that you could work smarter and not harder. That is very unique to see for someone at the age that you were. So, yeah, anyway, very cool. So, what is your superpower? And I think you already kind of talked about it a little bit, but are systems and playbooks, operationalizing things, reverse engineering? Would you say that's your superpower?
Could be it. Yeah. I'm not sure how great I am at that, but I'm really trying. I like those, and so I think I do think these are super important. I think it's that combined with me having a very broad skill set. I'm not very deep in anything. As I said, I can't be, because if I've never worked a job, many people work a job for like 10, 15 years, then they become an expert, and with that they launch a business, right? And I have skipped that part, and that has upsides, but it also has downsides, right? I'm not the actual domain expert for a lot of things. I've seen a lot of things, and I can say that I've been in remote software development for 10 years, and I have a lot of experience in that, mostly around building and designing software development teams, because I've actually been doing that. But I've not been a software developer for 10 years, or I've not been a product manager for 10 years. I've not been a designer for 10 years, but I have been all of these for a while. I've read up on absolutely everything. When I was 16, I thought I wanted to become a UI UX designer, and I've done a lot of that, just as a hobby, and for some clients I've done design. Turned out that once I wanted to apply for a design school, they told me I'd be better suited for computer science, but that's fine. I took a lot away from that, and that means that I can work with designers today. I can work with product managers, and so all of that is excellent. I've done a lot of marketing. I've done just a lot of very different things that allow me to. I've had part of the degree that I did is engineering management. So it has a lot of computer science. I've actually done computer science, but it's also a small MBA. So it gets you all of the finance and management courses. And so across the board, I think my superpower is that I can understand and grasp a lot of topics broadly and how they interconnect. I'll probably then need a specialist for everything for implementation. But I can really get things at a high level. I'd say.
So you would call yourself a visionary for sure, rather than integrator.
On the visionary slash integrator, I'm torn because I like SOPs and all of these things. So that's probably more of an integrator thing. However, yes, I probably down the road because right now I'm both still. But obviously, if you were to ask me where do I see myself in, let's say 2 years, it's definitely more on the visionary level as opposed to the integrator. Yes.
So, how do you approach building your personal brand while also growing the brand for Trustshoring?
I I think a lot of founders run into this issue and make that mistake of linking those together too much, right? So for me, it's definitely been I've since it started more as a lifestyle business, and I've been the only person in the company for a couple of years. That really turned into, well, Victor's doing everything, and so I always talk to Victor, and so people referred clients to Victor, not to Trustshoring, and then they want. So, long story short, the company brand used to be my personal brand, even though there was a name and a logo. It was really too interconnected, and also the entire LinkedIn, our YouTube channel. That's mostly me, and so that's how I've not approached building a personal brand next to my business brand. It's just always been the same thing. But now I really need to get out of that. And so we're taking steps to reduce my presence across the board. But I'm not really, I don't have any plans for a new personal brand or a new, not planning any of that right now. Just trying to separate them a little, focus on the company a bit more. And so I'm not sure if, that really helps, but I'm just not trying, actively not trying to have a personal brand at this point.
What would need to be true for you to focus on building your personal brand more, out of curiosity?
I probably once I start building other ventures, right? Once I finally get out of being the integrator and more into being the visionary, which would hopefully give me room to spread out a bit. I'm not planning to sell the business. I do want to run this for quite a while, but I don't necessarily want to be day to day involved for too long. So I think that's the point where when building a personal brand could become relevant again.
A lot of founders do the reverse of what you did, and they don't really distinguish, they don't leverage their personal.
It's easy, right? It's like the shortcut a bit.
Well, what you did is better than the opposite, which would have been that you didn't distinguish yourself and you only focused on building the business brand without establishing some yourself as a thought leader. It sounds like what you did was establish yourself as a thought leader while building the business brand.
Right.
So you have
Right.
you have been building a personal brand. You just haven't been separating it. Sounds like.
Right, correct. Yeah, that's 100% true. And I found that very easy because a company brand is so cold. It's not known if you don't associate anything with it, versus it's very easy to make a person likable and build trust with a person, right? So that's why that was a very good way to start. But at some point, that's when you run into issues and everybody just wants to talk to you. And that becomes a bottleneck at that point.
So let's dig into some of the technical stuff now. So if I am not a technical founder, if I'm not a technical founder and I'm building an MVP right now for my product, what is the best advice you could offer on avoiding common mistakes while building an MVP?
I think to keep it brief, because I could talk about that all day. And in fact, we have a video on YouTube that's already 3 years old of a talk I gave about building MVPs as a non-technical founder once, and it was supposed to be like 30 minutes long, but it went like 1.5 hours. But it organically got 34,000 views on YouTube That was before we were doing any marketing on the YouTube channel. So if anybody is interested in like the long version, feel free to check that out. But I think that before key pieces really, and number one would be don't overbuild, right? Really understand what's the minimum to build. And everybody says, yes, MVP, minimum viable product. But in reality, how can you deliver the result maybe even without building, right? A lot of times you can manually deliver a result. You can use click together a couple of tools. How can you, it's not what is the minimum feature set. No, that's already too far. It's like, what is the easiest way I can get this result to this person? And that's how you can really validate something. And that's number one. And the second one will be, can you sell this before you build? Right. That's like the upgrade on the first thing. Can I somehow serve on that to the client, and then can I actually sell that? Because that'd be the ultimate validation. SaaS is tough and software is tough because you have to spend so much to even get something out. And then when it works at scale, it's great, right? Because you have basically zero cost per unit, right? So the economies of scale are great, but you need to invest a lot. And so if you can get the result and validate without investing a lot, that's perfect. So number three would be similar, which is, can you use low code or other tools or SaaS platforms to get somewhere first? And the fourth one is something that a lot of people don't really think about is don't give equity to your developer friend. And that's because there are, in my world, there are three different types of tech leads. People try to call all of them CTO, but really only the last one is. And so the first level, who you need at the very beginning, is a developer who doesn't necessarily need to be good, but they need to be pragmatic and be able to deliver fast. Just get something out, understand what they're supposed to build, brainstorm, ideate, like, oh no, we can do this, maybe we can do that, and then hack, and something is done. That's who you need first. And the second person at the growth stage is someone who's a very seasoned lead developer. And they come in and they say, whoa, hold on a second. This hacky stuff, we're not doing any of that anymore. Coding standards, development process, a good architecture. What is that weird language doing there? Everything by the book. That's who you need at the second stage so that you can actually grow and have a business that is stable and not buggy, and a development team that performs. But you put that person in the first seat and you'll never launch, right? So it happens so often. I've seen that so much that it's crazy. And then the third person, like at expansion stage, you have a big team, you're like an actual company now, that's the actual CTO, and that's more of a management person. They're a people manager, they're a finance person, budget person, somebody who interviews developers, things like that, right? And so now you can see that whoever you give equity to first, is either not the right person now or will not be the right lead later. So obviously that's all fine. You can give equity to the first person for their job that they get you to through the first stage, but know that they might not be the right person to continue leading the company. So that's just very important to understand, and a lot of people get that wrong.
So I love that. Great job. Well said. I love that. Let's go back to the first person. It sounds like you are suggesting, definitely correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like you're suggesting that first level developer probably is just a single person at this MVP development stage and not necessarily a software house. Is that right?
Could be. It really depends on how big your MVP is going to be, right? You might not be able to deliver things with one developer. But the key here is that whoever you work with, whether it's a team, an individual, or an organization, that they be pragmatic.
What are the questions you would ask within trust shoring? You have a new client, they're building a new MVP, and you determine, that they need developer level 1, like you said. What type of questions are you going to ask the client to best match them to direct developer level 1?
Sure. I mean, we have an entire workbook. So that's definitely one thing we took away from the SaaS Academy is we have a workbook, an entire thing that we go through with our clients. We ask a lot of questions. We get like some knowledge transfer. We try to understand who's their target audience. We're trying to really get the business and the goals and the roadmap, and most importantly, the scale. Because what a lot of non-technical people don't understand is that how many features you build is less important for your cost investment and for who you need to hire than at what scale those need to operate. Take Google, for example. It's one form and a button, but they have some of the smartest people trying to make that work at scale and one of the largest development teams on this planet, right? I'm exaggerating a bit, but essentially, features don't equal developer seniority or budget, right? In a way, they do. Obviously, a more complex app at the same scale is more expensive than a less complex application, but the scale trumps everything. And so we need to understand if they're just an early stage company who have no go-to-market strategy and they're trying to talk to a few people to show them an idea, or if they're an existing sophisticated business with an audience, that if they launch something buggy, that will have a really bad impact on their company. And so we're also trying to understand, do you need to deal with things like financial transactions, right? That's a big no-no for bugs, right? It would transfer $1 million automatically to the wrong account.
Yeah.
It's probably a bad idea, right? Whereas if you're a to-do list application and something gets displayed wrong for like your one first client, that's probably not too bad. And so all of these factors go into understanding who's the right fit for them as their first developer. When it comes to who's your ideal first technical co-founder or partner, it's not necessarily the first developer. That's just the mentality that the leader, who's the tech leader within your company, needs to have. So that you might still want to work with a software house or not, but the person who makes the technical decisions within your company either understands that we need to be pragmatic and that we need to develop something that gets us to a certain stage fast, or that we really need to focus on quality right now and do everything by the book, or that that we need to build systems and teams and leadership and all of that.
What are the critical assets that you would say a founder or a product manager would need to have at the very early stages to give to this level 1 developer? What is the information that they need? So I'm assuming, some product definition, like you said, for sure, and identifying who the target audience is. Maybe some technical requirements, like what are the languages that we want to build this in? What is the tech stack we need? Are those the critical elements that you need to have ready for your level 1 developer? Or is that some of that informed by the level 1 developer?
It depends how well connected the developer is with the vision and the customer and the problem. And so that's where the technical founder has the biggest advantage early on, right? Because they don't need to do the feedback loop of back and forth. So the client wants that. Oh, can we maybe build that? That's easier. No, that doesn't work because ABC. Oh, okay, so maybe we could try that. That's a dialogue that happens within their head. And so that is much faster. But you need both of these sides, right? So the further that is a way. So you can imagine maybe two college students, a marketing student and a software developer, who are in the same dorm and they go to the same pizza place, see what problems they have with whatever managing their restaurant, and they just understand what software would solve their problems, right? They both go to the meeting with the client, they do the customer interviews together. Then you need much less documentation or anything, right? Because you have that information shared, because the crucial piece is not per se documentation, but understanding of the business context of the customer problems, of the of the pain points of all this business context, the user journey. And so a lot of times what I get is a founder who thinks they're doing the right thing. They come to me and say, I have everything documented. Here's the documentation. And the documentation describes every single button, but not what the app does for who. I have no idea who the customer is, and so that is equally worthless, because a developer will not be able to spot anything that they can help with. They can implement this one on one, and they probably need extreme documentation to be able to implement everything, but they don't understand what they're building, and so the context is really important. So that is first, the context first, the business context, target customer, their problem, their persona, the user journey, the glossary, what is the client's lingo, all of that is the most important information, and then you empower a developer to help you. And then of course, if you work with a software house and you work with a service provider where you need to have a contract of like, this is what you deliver for me, then yes, you create documentation, so that without documentation you don't have estimations, right? So if you want to know how much it'll cost, you need to create documentation. But that at that early stage sort of comes second and is a tool for organizing work rather than for brainstorming and getting some feedback from a developer.
That is a golden nugget you just dropped. That was very good, Victor. Very, very good. What are some secret hacks you recommend implementing in processes or development systems while working with offshore or onshore developers to avoid missed deadlines and protect your IP?
Absolutely. So well, it sounds a bit. I come from the outsourcing slash offshoring industry originally, right? And so people would think, cool, I can, somewhere in a remote country, I can get 10 developers for the price of one, right? Things like that. And so that's a bit counterintuitive, but I said, don't do that, right? The most efficient teams are when you have a higher seniority, right? The higher the seniority of your team members, the more efficient. The fewer people you have on your team, the better. So don't do the hire 10 for one thing. That makes absolutely no sense. You're just adding yourself another layer of management right there in miscommunication. And another, the more people you need to onboard and give that business context to, the more work you have. The more cultural and language and time zone overlap you have, the better too. And I'm not saying don't hire in remote countries, absolutely, but just make sure that you understand, you can communicate effectively, because in communication, there's a lot of nonverbal communication, right? There's expectations that come from culture, there's body language, there's different types of disagreeing, and how you trust people, how you build hierarchies, and so the closer you stay, the more effective you are, unless you're willing to put in the work to understand that, or you come from a different background, and then that is super easy for you, right? But other than that, that just works much better. And so, from a U.S. point of view, we do have the closest are Eastern Europe and Latin America. Well, Europe and Latin America in general. Those tend to have the best time zone overlap. The best cultural overlap, the best education, in that cultural sphere. But then again, if you have a background and you're originally Indian, let's say, then you can you have an amazing talent pool right there that you can tap into, that you understand, that you know how to work with, without learning that, because there are some differences. For example, we used to work with clients from Dubai quite a bit, and there's a complete different picture, because it's number one, it's like 2 hours of time zone difference, or even one from India. It's a 2 hour flight, is very close. A lot of the management in Dubai is Indian, and so the cultural difference is exactly zero, and so that becomes a different world. But if you're an American SaaS founder, then really the best you can do is have a small team, fairly close, can be overseas but close, and with a time zone overlap and everything. Even 4 hours, that's fine. That's great. Three, more than enough. But having to have somebody work late at night to have 2 hours of an overlap, I'm not sure how sustainable that is. Um, Apart from that, another misconception, oh yeah, that's a good one, is don't have your CTO manage the dev team. That's an interesting one. But so in marketing, let's say, the longer you work in your field, the higher up you go, and the higher up you go, the more you want to manage, right? The more you just want to do strategy and have people who implement under you, right? The CMO, they're leading the show, and they probably don't want to do anything without a team, and so they lead people to a goal. Now in the tech world, it's a bit different. Developers, the more they work, the more they want to code, or the more they code, the more they want to code. And many, not all, but many developers never really want to lead a team. And so what you see in product teams is that whatever, I usually try to say product lead and tech lead, not CPO, CTO, because again, CTO for me is a very specific title. But whatever tech lead you have at any given stage, usually what they're supposed to do is make the technical decisions, be the last sort of voice on technical decisions, architecture, create the technical strategy, do code reviews, interview new developers, do all of these things, but they don't have to now day to day manage them and lead them to an outcome. That's usually more of a product function. So the product manager slash product owner is really the person who then owns the outcome of the team. Now, in terms of who leads the certain team, you do have more than one person. So you have the product owner who owns what are we building in what order. You have the tech lead who says, okay, how do we do that? And what technology do we use? How do we do the architecture? What person do we put onto that? Who's the best person? And then often you have a UI UX designer who says, okay, great. From what you're telling me, this is my input and how that should look like. But then the actual delivery of everything, excuse me, a lot of times rests with the product function, who understands how to build a process, how to manage people. And we actually have a lot of clients who come to us and say, I need help with my development team. Some things that we're estimates are getting missed. I don't know when we'll deliver what. I need a better CTO. And we dive in. We're no. You don't have a process to do estimations. You don't do Scrum well. You don't know how to prioritize, and you don't really have a great roadmap. And that's why you don't see any progress. Your tech team is actually great, and you have a great CTO. But don't try to squeeze your CTO into a project management function, because that is likely not going to work. So we usually advise on getting either a fractional CPO or a project manager with product coaching, things like that work really well. Yeah, and that solves a lot of these problems.
So, what about protecting IP specifically? So, was that just kind of
Right.
covered mostly in the agreement?
There's two sides to IP. There's the legal legal side of it, what's on paper, and the de facto side, especially internationally. And so legally, the most important thing you have to do is make sure the IP is transferred to you. Um, you can sign NDAs, whatever. You can do that as much as you want. The factual side, from what I can see, is that number one, you can't force a remote party to obey that. But number two, I have literally not seen anybody abuse that yet. Simply because, um, simply because developers or development shops are good at building software, but not good at building businesses. And so they really wouldn't know. They're not the domain expert. They don't have a channel to your audience. They wouldn't know what to do with the software most of the time. And so I'm not very worried about that. I really haven't seen anything terrible over those 10 years that I've been in that industry. So I've seen a lot of things go wrong, and not these. So that tells me it's not much of a problem. But legally, where you really need to make sure, and I'm not a lawyer, so it's not legal advice, but you need to make sure that the IP is transferred on paper. Because if you want to raise funding, or if you're looking for an exit, that's the number one thing a buyer or investor is going to be looking into in due diligence of a tech company, right? Is, do you own the IP at the software? Because that is a major deal breaker if you don't. So that is the absolute most important thing, even though it might not have any effect in terms of people copying, stealing code, whatnot, which I'm really not very worried about. But the IP, that you own it, that is crucial.
Got it. So, what are the key roles? You talked a little already about it, but what are the key roles of a CTO and a CPO? And you already covered CTO. I think you've really gotten into the nitty gritty with that. But let's talk more about the CPO. What is their key role, and what is the organizational structure for both the product and the development team that will help facilitate the best collaboration between those two?
Sure. So the product lead, right? Whether it's a product manager or head of product or a CPO, but the product lead's job is to decide what we're building and in what order. That's really what it boils down to. That is their core function. So in order to do that, they do what? They build a roadmap. And how do they do that? Well, they take information from the company vision, mission. They talk to customers. They do market research. They look at data, especially product data. And so they take that input, make their informed decision, apply a prioritization framework, and from that, they create a roadmap. And that then, depending who does that, right, in very small product teams, that's still the same person. You'd go into working as a team on researching how do we now implement that on the roadmap? How do we solve these issues? From that, you create documentation. Oftentimes, again, in small teams, that can be one person. Sometimes you have designers be the product lead. Designers are great at being a product because they're very customer centric, and so they have a lot of these skills already. And so that goes all the way from building the high level roadmap to creating mockups and prototypes and documentation, really, before handing that over to the development team. Of course, being informed and consult the development team to make sure everything is feasible, that there's not a simpler implementation, whatnot. But that is sort of the product function. What are we building and in what order?
What is the best standard of communication or frequency of meetings, or what does that collaboration look like, and the frequency between those two areas would you say that works best? So do you suggest, for example, that they have a daily stand up with everyone in both product and development, or is it better to have that just be a product team and then have the development team meet separately and then maybe meet weekly to determine what the status updates are on various tasks between them? Or what do you recommend there?
I wouldn't say these are separate teams necessarily. Obviously, it depends what stage of company you're at, right, and how big the company is. But ultimately, what we see a lot is that you have these squads, right? If you go beyond a single team, and so you have these squads that are compromised by a product lead. You have a product lead, you have a tech lead, and you have a designer. Exactly that leadership team within a squad, and then you have those developers within that team. But that's one team. Now that leadership team, obviously, they belong to the head of product or the CPO, and so there's probably a tech lead as well for the company. And so all the tech leads, it's more of a matrix structure, right? Where it's like product lead or CPO, CTO, and then you have the various tech leads and product leads within a squad. But ultimately, working on that one project or that one feature or the one product within a suite of products, or however those are split between teams,
Mm-hmm.
that's one team. So they're not informing other teams per se in that regard. They're collaborating together. They're continuously working together as a team on that.
So would you recommend then that that group meet daily, weekly, or?
There's different flavors really, but what I see works really well is daily stand-ups for sure. They can be text-based though. That's fine. And then usually if you follow Scrum, for example, right, you have your various meetings within Scrum. If you're running a 2 week Scrum sprint, then you have your grooming, you have your demo, you have those various meetings, and so that's a fairly good standard. Then you take a look at how big is the team. Do you really need everything? Because oftentimes that I mean, if you look at agile in general, there's a philosophy behind it, and a lot of times people don't look at the philosophy. They just try to implement step by step all the various meetings and processes. So you do need to look at what makes sense. But generally, following that cadence is very productive. It makes a lot of sense. It has everything that you need to a inform each other well, but b give enough time for developers to just work on what's now been agreed for that next sprint, because that is sort of the definition of that. We know what we're flexible enough to change from sprint to sprint, but we are, once we start a sprint, we know what we're doing and we can just work on that, right? And then obviously you have your daily stand up to understand, is all going according to plan? Is anybody blocked anywhere? Are there any questions? Can we help each other? These sort of things.
Okay, awesome. What are some key assets or items that you should have from your CTO to plan for the unexpected? Whether that be they get hit by a bus, any kind of disaster recovery, and also just to protect the IP and the, what's the word I'm looking for? Just continuity of the business.
Of course. Yeah. Well, ideally, there should be more than one person holding the keys to the castle, right? So whether that's access to your AWS or wherever, whatever you use for computing, um, whether that's access to the code base, but usually every developer has read access, so that's fine. You can just pull that, right? But all of that, the development pipeline, all the tools, the database, the server, everything, right? Wherever that is, the DNS, the domain, oh my God, that very important. And so wherever you have two-factor authentication, whatever it might be, make sure that you're also added to that as the CEO, and you have access to that. We get that a lot of times where people don't have any of that, and it's all with a dev shop. And so you're a 1 million ARR SaaS company, but what separates you from complete failure is somebody tripping over one of these internet wires. Or that's not great, right? That lead to another continent. Not great. So we try to come in with, for example, a fractional CTO to go through that, understand what the architecture is, and create that plan. Have that separate so that a founder because you don't have to understand everything, right? It's just that you have the access that you can hand that to somebody who knows what to do with them so that they're actually able to take a look at that. And that includes documentation on deployment, documentation how to run the app, documentation how everything is set up. So that is pretty important. Yes. Usually, though, if you have an in-house team and you have a capable in-house team, that knowledge will be distributed. It's just really about the access.
What's one book, podcast, or resource that has profoundly impacted your perspective and mindset as a founder?
I'm not sure if that's going to be anything surprising. I read there's really a couple that I think are really important, and I learned a lot. Number one is The Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes, I think is his name. I'm not sure again, but I read that a very long time ago, and it's not that much about being salesy or sales. It's really about structures and process. And have I mentioned that I like process and structure? So that is a really good book on how to build an organization that just brings in business, right? Then there's that podcast, The Startup Chat by Steli FD, which I really like. It's a very good book. It's a very good podcast. Sorry, it's a very good podcast. Very down to earth, very good advice for early stage founders. So that was something I listened to a lot. Generally, especially if you're in SaaS, then the MicroConf by Rob Walling and the podcast Startups for the Rest of Us is just great. It's gold. It's a great community, especially early stage. It's amazing, and people there are very, very knowledgeable, and they helped me a lot to get the business going. That was my MicroConf was always even. I didn't even have a SaaS, but I went there. I still don't have a SaaS. I went there to get business advice and meet with people, with friendly entrepreneurs, with bootstrappers, with people who would understand that. And so I really loved that community. And the book that I now just read, I had a very long drive, a 3-day drive. And so I read a couple of books, listened to them through Audible. But you obviously asked me about the visionary versus the integrator, and I've now read Traction, so I know what you're talking about. And so I thought that is a really good book, and so we're in the process of not officially implementing that with a coach or anything, but taking quite a few of it and implementing that within the company. And so I can really recommend Traction to anyone. I tried reading it early on when I had that one part-time person, and it was not very useful, obviously. But once you're trying to build a slightly larger team that gets projects done on its own, I thought, wow, that's just a must read. Yeah,
Definitely. Traction is a Bible. I call it the
right,
business Bible. I feel like there's a couple other books that I personally that inspired my mindset change most. Traction is like a systems
right,
Bible
right.
for me.
It is.
It didn't really affect my mindset, especially once I read it. I mean, I was already had, several team members, and so it was really just like, oh, this is how I can, kind of wrangle these people and put these systems in place. It was just kind of like a playbook, if
Totally,
you will, for across every function of your business. This is what you need to do at a high level, but detailed
totally.
enough that it was actionable. It's definitely a powerful book. Powerful. So, where can people find you on social, Victor? And you can also share the information for Trustshoring.
So since I'm my personal brand right now mostly, so on LinkedIn it's mostly me, Victor Porolnik. That's where you can find me. I post a lot of tips and advice, but you can find the same on YouTube as well. That's the company brand now that we're trying to build, Trustshoring, but it's mostly my content at this point. We have a channel where we post weekly advice. So obviously trustshoring.com is where you can find more about us and hire a fractional CTO, CPO, get help with fixing your development team, getting any advice, recruiting developers, and finding software houses.
Awesome. Awesome stuff. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope this episode was as actionable and enlightening for you as it was for me. Thanks so much, Victor, for joining me today.
I had such a great conversation. Thank you so much, Mia.
Yes, yes, yes. Thanks, everyone. Bye.